Hello, today is November 10th, 2021. Welcome into this Coaching in Context webinar hosted by Fielding Graduate University. My name is Dr. Carrie Arnold. I'm the Program Director for Evidence-Based Coaching here at Fielding Graduate University. And I'm delighted to see familiar names and faces at this session today. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're joining in from. We're glad you're here. This session is being recorded and will be available on the Fielding website later for those who maybe didn't get a chance to be fully present. To receive an ICF CEU, you do need to be fully present though for the entire session. I'll be putting in an evaluation link into the chat box about 10 minutes before we end today, and you'll just need to click on that in the next 24 hours and just complete a very, very short evaluation, and then you will receive an email with your ICF CEU in about 3 to 4 weeks after the session. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. We're not going to do a real formal PowerPoint. We have a few slides that Janice is going to share with you. Dr. Sabatine is a coaching program director herself. She has a PhD and she's a professional certified coach. She is a researcher by trade. She is the past president of the ICF-Pittsburgh chapter, and she runs a coach training program at Duquesne. And my conversations with her up till now have been so collaborative and lovely, partly because she has edited a book that Fielding Graduate University has now decided to have as required reading in our evidence-based coach training program. And I'm very impressed with the level of scholarship and research behind this. And so I invited her in to spend time with us to talk about what does it mean to be an evidence-based coach. And so Janice, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Carrie. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of the Fielding participants that are on the call today for being interested in the topic and joining us. And I also want to thank all of the Pittsburgh people that I see on the screen here. Thank you for coming to be a part of this discussion, and hope you'll join, all of you, not just the Pittsburgh people, but hope all of you will join in to the discussion. I also want to thank in particular Sister Susan English, who is on the call. She is a co-editor of the book, so it's nice to have you with us today, Susan, and special thanks because she's responsible for a lot of my success. She's responsible for me being at Duquesne University. I came on first as an instructor and then as a co-director with Susan for many years. She retired last year. We have a new co-director this year. And I also want to mention and thank Steve Wendell. I don't think he was able to make the call today, but he's an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh who went through our coach training program and is very interested in coaching research, and collaborated with me several years ago on a project. We were the recipients of a Harnish Foundation grant through the Institute of Coaching. And he's responsible for a lot of the coaching work that I do as well. So I don't think he was able to make it today, but I just wanted to shout out to him. So I was hoping today in the hour that we have to sort of break the discussion up into two general areas. And the first was to talk a little bit about what do we mean by evidence-based to coaching, and then how that led into the book, the Professional Coaching Principles and Practice book, and how we're using it. I'd like to hear how you're using it a little more. Maybe we can share with each other. We seem to have these two contingents here that we can share with each other how that book is useful for us as coaches. I really didn't intend for this to be a lecture. I want it to be a discussion and a joint exploration. Like I said, I will share some information, but I really hope that if you have comments, please either raise your hand or put something in the chat. Carrie said that she would pay attention to that. I don't want to be the only one talking for an hour. Some qualifiers before we jump into some content. First of all, I'm not an expert on this topic. I consider myself to be a student, right? Always learning. I'm not an expert researcher, coaching researcher, or creating the evidence. But I do like to follow the research. And I think that when Sister Susan and I were co-directors of the program, and we revamped it several years ago, and as my current co-director, Peter Gabriel, and I continue, is to have that as a foundation, for our curriculum. And for me personally, as a coach practitioner, to have that as a foundation for my continued learning and development as a coach. So I'm going to share some information with you today that isn't mine. It's the words and the graphics and the information from the experts. And some of the information that I'm going to put up on the screen and share with you is, I will supply all the resources, the references from where I got the information, but because some of it's published work, although I was given permission to use it for educational purposes, I can't distribute it or disseminate it. So I'm not sharing my slides, but I am giving you access to a couple of slides that have the references and the resources on them. So that said, I'm going to share my screen here and jump into some of the content. So what do we mean by evidence-based coaching? And Anthony Grant was unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, but a very prolific academic researcher around coaching from Australia. And in one of the papers that he wrote, that I will give you the reference to, said that evidence-based coaching is the intelligent and conscientious use of relevant and best current knowledge integrated with professional practitioner expertise in making decisions about how to deliver coaching to coaching clients and in designing and delivering coach training programs. Which I thought that one sentence covered so much and was very, I think I rely on that, right? The intelligent and conscientious use of relevant and best current knowledge. So what people have studied, some empirical evidence, but also integrating that with best practice. It reminds me a bit of like the science and the art and the science of our profession. And in making decisions about how to deliver coaching to our clients, how I would practice, how you would practice as a practicing coach, but also in designing and delivering coach training programs. So I just thought it was very comprehensive way to describe what, at least how his definition of evidence-based coaching is. So if we sort of use that as a foundation, that's what it is. Why? Why should we bother? And I think these next slides, Richard Boyatzis is a professor at Case Western Reserve University and does extensive research, much of it related to coaching. And by his words, a good coach practitioner needs a foundation in both, just like what Anthony Grant said, both theory and research, as well as practical issues of what works. So the science and the art. Otherwise, we are relying on things like what I think works, which is sort of like pop culture type thing. And that can be influenced by many things that we can't necessarily rely on. So we do need theory and the research that follows from those theories to be an intellectual anchor for us as coaches and as coach trainers. And he said, you know, that's important, and it's important that there are people out there doing good research and collecting good practitioner, the art, right? But we don't have to, all of us, know all about the science. Know all about all of the research and the design and the academic information. But we should be informed readers and stay up on current research and emerging theories. And I think that's important. We don't all have to be the experts, and we don't all have to know everything there is to know about how to conduct a research study and the different types of research studies. But we should be able to stay up on things, and I think also assess if what I'm reading, where in the hierarchy of relevance does what I'm reading or following fall? And and before we do that, this was another slide that he shared in a presentation at Anthony Grant, at the Institute of Coaching, their conference in the fall. This was, I think, in 2017, because that was the same year that I was there with him, and he gave me these slides. Ken Sheldon is a professor of psychology at the University of Missouri, and Anthony Grant was quoting him as saying, "To me, the single most important thing for coaching," and he's also a psychologist, so he said, "and positive psychology, to keep in mind is the necessity of collecting rigorous empirical evidence. This may be the only thing that separates the field from earlier humanistic psychology and from current non-validated self-help books, while also dealing with difficult scientific issues concerning demand effects, placebo effects, and just plain wishful thinking. And that coaching is especially vulnerable to these problems because of the commercial and money-making possibilities it presents." So I think there's a lot there, right? And that really resonated with me, that we have to really be careful that we aren't just making things up. We aren't just deciding that this is the way a coach should coach, or this is the way we should train coaches. And I think I'm probably speaking to the choir here, because you're most of you from either graduate Fielding University or have gone through the Duquesne coach training program, 2 university affiliated programs. And while I don't mean in any way to be criticizing non-university based programs, but I believe that what is the common thread for a university based program is that we aren't commercial. We aren't proposing a commercial model for coaching, that we're teaching it like a field of study. And so we're looking for the information. So this isn't a perfect analogy, but from the beginning, when I was learning and training as a coach, I kept comparing it to my own academic education. So, my background's in chemistry and biochemistry, and I think, well, yes, I went to a particular university and we used particular books, but I'm sure there were plenty of other universities that used the same books, right, to teach those subjects. There wasn't anything proprietary about the information that was being taught to us. And so I like to think the same about in our coach training. As a university-based program, it's not proprietary. We don't have a Duquesne way of coaching that you have to have gone through our program to be a practitioner of. You learn how to be a coach based on, as a university, that we've assimilated the information that's necessary. We are an ICF accredited program, so we follow the core competencies. But we don't have any ownership of some model that you have to keep coming back to us and paying to be recertified to use our approach, right? It's an academic approach, I believe. And I know the analogy isn't 100% true, but I like to think of a university-based program that way, and we certainly aspire to that. And from my conversations with Carrie, I believe Fielding is the same, right? I mean, your program's called an evidence-based approach to coaching. So yeah, so before I go on to any other slides, I just like to hear from you. Like, as you think about this, maybe you have already thought about it, or from what I've shared so far, what are you thinking? And I can't see everybody, so.
Janice, I'll pop in here just for a second. I really appreciate the language you're using. I'm going to probably use some of it moving forward. Many times I'll say we are not guru focused. We don't circle our curriculum around one model, one thought leader, or one theory, or one assessment even. We talk about learning to study coaching almost as a buffet. There's a lot that informs the work we do in the world. And we have to look at different disciplines like psychology and neuroscience and philosophy and our predecessors to we stand on their shoulders. And so I really like the way you're framing it, that this is not something that is only available to a few. We have strict fidelity to the ICF core competencies, and that's what keeps our profession anchored in doing some really good work.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. I've seen some nice articles also out there by coaches who have aligned the core competencies with certain models that we use, certain research models that we use. And that's always been interesting and fascinating to me too. How about anybody else? What are your thoughts about just this little bit we've talked about so far?
I'll ask a question it's just come to my mind. There are a lot of coaching schools, if you will, or programs, and one that comes to mind is CTI and things like that, programs like that. And it says something about one's approach to coaching. A CTI coach says, I'm a CTI coach. So when we talk about the evidence-based, and again, as you describe it, really the scholarly position of what are the informing theories and models and so on, and there is a buffet. How do you look at someone, and I keep using CTI just because it's coming to mind, but there are similar, where you know there's, or like integral coaching, is a certain frame of mind, a certain approach, a certain model, that's the right word, but you know what I'm trying to say? Is this, can you kind of speak to that? Because I don't even know what my question really is.
Well, I will say that there's room for everybody. I don't want to exclude people that have a certain approach to coaching. What I will say about like integral or maturity coaching, I tend to think of that as something that if we are interested in that, because there's so much to pick from, we can't possibly know everything and be everything. I like to think of that as broadening and expanding, sort of like continuing coach education. I know that many of our coaches, after they finish our program, if there's one thing that sort of resonates with them, or they kind of like can study that a little more than some other coaches may be drawn to at studying another aspect of it. It sort of adds to our tool, I hate to say toolkit, but it adds to our knowledge base, right? And our approaches. I know some coaches that have been trained through CTI. I don't know a lot about the program, so I don't want to comment about any specific program. And I don't know, some of the coaching schools that aren't university based may be like us and follow an evidence base. I just don't know that for sure. Anybody else?
I would just thank you for propagating this evidence-based approach, because actually I think that is what I was missing for 10 years of practicing in coaching and going between different schools, because I was trained as the solution-based, solution-focused coach. And then I realized that maybe it's not the best approach for my clients and for me, knowing my personality, who am I as the person, as the coach, and knowing my clients, who are they as clients and their needs. And then I was like transferring between different programs and different schools. And until several years ago, I ended up with reading coaching, different books, including evidence-based coaching, edited by Anthony Grant and others, and then Tatiana Bashkirova and Eleni Cox and others. And then I realized, oh my God, it's just so easy, because if you know the theory, and then you can of course you can pick up your approach based on like what works for you and what you think it works for you and your clients. But it's always interesting that, you know, doing, for example, the DEMA sessions with MCC coach, being a PCC coach, of course, I regularly watch these sessions, and a lot of coach, they asking different questions. Why did you do that? Why did you do that? Because really, if you don't know the theory behind the practice, it's really not always understandable to comprehend why the coach can do that or cannot do this. Because in practice, and ICF in particular, we should be guided by the markers, by competences. So, and that was a huge part. Theory was a huge part that I was missing during the 10 years of my practice. And really, that's so much important that you do this. You provide this, not just information, but this structured learning to all coaches around the globe. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you. I remember several years ago, I did a coach training in a specific area. It was a program, a coach training program. It wasn't university based. And then as I was studying more and I learned some more theories about coaching and about change, I saw a very strong parallel to the process that I had been taught in this one coaching school and this theory. And I said something to one of the instructors. I was like all excited about, wow, look, you've got this evidence base to support this process that maybe you just came up with on your own, but there really is this evidence base. And rather than being happy about it, they were appalled because they saw it as competition. And that just jumped out at me. It just really further emphasized that not everyone in the business has the same perspective around the value of an evidence base. Like if you're very commercially driven, to see some theory and some research come out that would back up your approach as competition was kind of eye-opening to me.
Absolutely, and I agree that, for example, in Russia, because I'm from Russia originally, and in Russia we do have this certainly one dominating school, which is about solution-focused approach. And right now the market is changing a little bit, but still it was like they work in Russia more than 10 years already. And now what I see that a lot of many different schools are coming and offering their other approach to coaching. And believe me, it's just very much interesting threads like to read in social networks and like around the Facebook or Instagram when they have these kind of discussions. But these discussions are always based on the practical things, not based on theories. And that's it.
Thank you.
Janice, there are some thoughts in the chat, and then I see Marcia has her hand up.
Great, Marcia.
Yeah, hi. I apologize for not having my video on, but this is a low screen date for me today. But what catches my attention here on the slide, along with the emphasis on rigorous empirical evidence, and this has to do with what you were talking about, Janice, and just a second ago when you said that people were kind of taken back when you were actually getting excited about the whole notion of evidence-based theoretical framework. But that's the need for critical thinking. And I have found that when I am in certain types of webinars or even conversations, that they're oftentimes more of a focus on what tools can I put in my toolkit? Is there a template that I can follow versus sitting back and really doing critical thinking about what it is that I'm doing and what could I be doing better. So could you speak a little bit more about this critical thinking emphasis? Because I don't know if we do that enough when we bring coaches together in dialogue for just that kind of reflection around why am I doing what I'm doing? What's informing what I'm doing?
Yeah, I guess it depends on the group of coaches that you gather with. Sometimes we have had groups of coaches, periodically we get together as study groups, and we do practice certain approaches. I wouldn't say so much tools, but certain approaches, like we will have studied something, but what does that look like? And we'll coach each other and sort of, I guess, critique it in some way. I think I also, when you were talking about tools, I think we have to keep in mind that as a new coach, a brand new coach, sometimes tools can be very helpful to help build the skill, right? So if there is a template or there is a tool that a coach can rely on as they're learning, what we see oftentimes is that all of a sudden the tool isn't necessary, like the template isn't necessary anymore because the coach has sort of, it's in their bones now, right? So I don't want to say all tools are bad or relying on tools are bad, because that can be quite helpful. I don't know if I answered your question, but those are my thoughts from what you said. Carrie, what's in the chat?
Yeah, a couple things. Jennifer says, I think it's hugely important for the validity of the overall reputation of coaching that we maintain professionalism and high standards, which ultimately will serve the clients and their needs best. And I think that's a really important comment on who are we in service to? And then let me just read a couple other comments, Janice, and you can respond how you'd like. Another comment says, evidence-based approach signals that a field entered an adult stage, which I think is an interesting way of framing it. And that presents several obligations to follow evidence-based practice and also contribute to generating the evidence for the profession and disseminate it to the community. I actually would love for you to spend a little bit of time on that last point of how are we generating new evidence. That's still a big gap from my perspective, that we don't have enough yet. There's a big desire for this profession to have more researchers, for sure. And then there's one other comment. Sometimes the term evidence-based gets questioned a lot, maybe even here at Fielding in the title of our program. And so how do we manage those who are challenging that term? And I like what you put at the beginning. There's lots of different ways we can frame what we mean by evidence. But I'll pause there and let you respond to any of those.
Yeah, so you're challenging my memory, but yes, I think it's not an easy topic. I think we could spend hours just talking about what do we mean exactly by evidence and how are we basing our coaching and our curriculum on that. And I think that while there was not very much evidence for a long time, I did see a chart recently, and I don't remember the numbers, but the number of publications, the number of articles that have been published documenting coaching research has really, it's almost like exponential. It is increasing a lot. Just the fact that now we have an organization that supplies the grant funding for it, right? The Institute of Coaching has the money, and that the ICF has just partnered with them and given, I can't remember, $500,000 maybe, Carrie, you might know, over 5 years to support the coaching research grants from the Institute of Coaching. So I think we're moving in the right direction, and we are in the early stages of being really professional, a profession.
I'd like to point back to the book, in that chapter 6 is about research. And while it's already, research gets out of date, but that might be a good place for people to start. You get some names of people. So it's
is that Jonathan Passmore, Susan?
Yes, it's Passmore and Cotterill.
Yeah. Yeah, was there something else that you asked me, Carrie?
Well, I think it would be valuable for us to hear a little bit more about if you could wave your magic wand and see more research in the next few years, what would that look like?
Well, I think I would like to see it span a variety of questions, right? It's not just about does coaching work? And of course, what does work mean? But more about, I guess, the approaches, I guess, I don't know, parsing it a little bit, finding out a little bit more about what are we asking, right? It's not, like I said, it's not just does coaching work, but what about it? What about the approaches lead to what kinds of outcomes? Perhaps in what certain circumstances might we choose certain approaches? You know, I'm not up on all the research, and maybe some people are doing that, but and I know people are doing research around delivery methods, you know, especially, and this started before the pandemic, but especially now with the pandemic, about different delivery methods. But I think I would like to see research around, like, maybe more around specific theories. I know when we put our grant application in, and this was in 2015, I believe, to the Institute of Coaching, the original, and I was so glad that they had a rigorous review committee, because the original proposal was just, did it work? And they didn't want, well, is coaching, and we had outcomes that we were measuring, but it wasn't just, are those outcomes affected, but which model are you using? What type, how are you approaching? What's the theory behind the way you're approaching coaching these students to see what kind of an impact it has, not just coaching. So I guess if I had a magic wand, I would just like to see specifics around different approaches and the kinds that might help us maybe as coaches to say, wow, when I'm faced with this kind of a situation, maybe this approach is more appropriate. If I'm faced with, you know, a different situation, maybe a different approach might be more appropriate. Those are just the thoughts off the top of my head. I'll probably think of something more profound later, but right now that's what I'm thinking. Let's move on here for a minute. I just have a few more things to share, and then want to talk about it again. So, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but, you know, in general, if you're familiar with research, there's sort of this hierarchy of the strength of the evidence. And that's very true, especially in the scientific fields and in the medical field. And it's not so important right now, I think, that we go through this or we understand the different types of studies. But just to be aware that not all scientific experiments or scientific studies have the same rigor or have the same weight to them. And while this hierarchy certainly holds, you know, in the hard sciences, it's not necessarily that one is better than the other in coaching, but that they give you different information. And so it's just important to understand that I want to be clear about what questions being asked in a study, and if it's the appropriate type of study to give that kind of information. And again, you know, as practitioners, we don't necessarily have to know all the specifics about that, but we could ask, and just to be aware that different types of studies apply differently. You know, they give you different kinds of information. Which leads to what Anthony Grant was saying, and I think what Richard Boyatzis was saying, and I think what we all sort of are feeling, is that the evidence base for coaching comes from two places, like we mentioned before. It comes from our professional wisdom, what we as individual coaches have experienced, what maybe we come together and as a group and come to some consensus. My sense is, and I don't know the whole history of the ICF, and I know, Carrie, you did a really nice job at Converge when you were talking about some of this, but you know, people came together, I think, when they came up with the core competencies as group consensus, right? There wasn't a whole lot of research when the ICF was formed and when they came up with the competency. So it was a lot based on group experience and consensus, which has value. I don't think, we aren't just a strict scientific endeavor. There is value in the professional wisdom, and we have to value and weigh that. And it's not just that, right? We should also integrate empirical evidence. And we can separate that as coaching specific research and coaching relevant research. And certainly as our profession is growing, we have relied a lot on coaching relevant research because there wasn't a lot of coaching specific. But in recent years, we are seeing a lot more coaching specific research. So just to keep that in mind, that it is an integration of both and the different types of empirical evidence that is out there. And Anthony Grant, put together a very nice chart here, looking at how we might evaluate how strong or how relevant the evidence is that we're looking at to coaching practice. And if you just look across the bottom, we have this separation between coaching related research, which might be psychology and might be neuroscience and some other field that you could see how it would apply also in coaching. And then there's scientific studies that were conducted specifically around coaching, so coaching specific research. And then we have less rigorous coaching related research. So that's probably the poorest relevance to coaching, right? The poorest evidence because it's not directly related to coaching and it's not very rigorous. We also have coaching specific research that is less rigorous. Then we have coaching related that's rigorous, but it's not directly related to coaching. And then we have very rigorous research and it is directly related to coaching. And so it's probably the strongest evidence in terms of empirical research, empirical evidence. So it's just something that to think about when you are reading something. Where does it fall in here? And so how strongly is it related, perhaps, to you as a coach practitioner or an educator? So I want to move into a little bit about how we are using it at Duquesne. I don't want to go into extensive information about it, but before I do that, just open it back up to some questions or conversation around these last couple of things I shared.
Janice, Grace has a question.
Sure.
Do you know how much of the research in coaching is peer-reviewed?
Well, I don't have a number, but I do have a slide that has, and it's not comprehensive, I'll show it in a minute, a number of peer-reviewed coaching-specific research journals. And it's probably not comprehensive. I don't know all of them. And I can find that slide. Let me see, where is it?
And I also put in chat a link to the Graduate School Alliance for Education and Coaching, and they maintain a research site on their website that lists a lot of coaching journals as well. You might want to check that out. It probably matches your list, Janice.
That's great. Thank you for doing that, Carrie. And the Institute of Coaching, if you're a member, they have subscriptions, full text access to a number of coaching specific journals as a benefit to membership. And I can, let me see, that's these are just some, and I put this list together a couple years ago for our program at Duquesne, I'm sure. And these aren't necessarily coaching specific like positive psychology, but there are the International Journal of Theory, Research, Practice, and the International Journal of Evidence-Based Coaching and Mentoring. So these aren't necessarily coaching specific, but I know that there's a number of coaching specific journals. I should probably update this. But any other thoughts before I on.
Nothing else in chat.
Okay, so we have a ICF accredited ACTP program at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh. And as I mentioned earlier, we really do strive to have an evidence base to what we teach, and evidence being both, right? The wisdom of the practitioner as well as empirical evidence. And in our program is divided into webinar. Well, now it's all online, but webinars and then weekend meetings, like Friday evening, all day Saturday. So we always talk about our weekends. We have 5 weekends in the first semester, and our 5th weekend is called expansion. And part of the time that we spend during that weekend is introducing our students, because we're about halfway through the program, introducing our students to ways that they can continue developing as a coach after graduation. And we also, and then I was also going to share with you, and again, this is not comprehensive in any way. This was just off the top of my head the other day when I thought, well, maybe I'll show some slides today. Just an indication of some of the theories and research and evidence that we base our teaching on. We spend very intentional about and overtly sharing the intentional change theory by the researchers at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, immunity to change, the Robert Keegan and colleagues at Harvard, self-determination theory, we share that very overtly and specifically and related to coaching. And that's the work of Richard Ryan and Edward Deasty at the University of Rochester. And to a smaller extent, adult development is a field of its own, but we do introduce a little bit about adult development into, and it's certainly underlying and foundational in some of the things that we teach as well. Again, this isn't exhaustive. And, as I was thinking about this earlier this morning, besides these sort of formal ways that we bring some relevance or evidence into our coaching, we have, for example, one of our graduates is a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a medical doctor, a psychiatrist. And he has been very generous with his time, and he will come back and do a segment for the students on emotions and the origin of emotions, and understanding the sort of neuroscience behind that and applications to coaching. And the other nice thing about being a psychiatrist is he's been helpful in providing some information to coaches about recognizing when to refer a client to a mental health professional. So while that's not published work, it is a licensed physician, a psychiatrist, who can share his knowledge, and as a trained coach can show how he sees it applicable to the coaching profession. So there's just some examples of how we try to, again, it's not a commercial model. We're just trying, I like Carrie when you said a buffet. We graze the buffet and try to incorporate what seems relevant to our coaching, to our curriculum. I shared this with you. We also share with them, what are other places to go to continue your growth as a coach. And I mentioned the Institute of Coaching. We should, the ICF, of course, the local chapters. We have a local chapter, the global organization, other continuing education resources. This is just an example of how, as a part of our program, we like to provide the students with some resources to continue their growth in their education. And I'm just looking at the time, so I want to leave a little bit of time for talking about the book. So this was so interesting. I'm going to stop sharing for a while because we don't need to look at the book. When Carrie approached me because of this connection that we had, where they are using the book that Susan and Phil and I edited in their program, I just found it fascinating. So I thought I'd just share with you a little bit about how the book came into being. So the other editor of the book, Philip Brownell, went through the Duquesne coaching program. Oh, I don't know, Susan, 2014, maybe 15. I can't remember. But anyway, several years ago. He is a licensed psychologist and is prolific. He's written a number of books and also journal articles, and he's an academic. And he came to us and he said, I think it would be great if there were a specific like desk reference or a handbook for coaching. And he sort of had the connections with publishers, and wouldn't it be wonderful to do this? And so Susan and Janice, would you like to do this with me? And Susan and Janice naively said, yes, of course. No, we're very thankful and very grateful to him for that, but it was quite a bit of work. A lot of work behind the scenes for creating something like this. Actually thinking about the areas that we wanted information around. Who were the experts in those fields? How are we going to reach out to them? Would they accept, some of the areas that we wanted some chapters on? Some people that were experts in the field didn't have the time, weren't willing for one reason or another to contribute. So the end product is always sort of the what we were able to get and what we thought might be valuable and important. But the other thing that I do want to point out is that when we approached the authors, we were very overt, very specific and intentional about telling them that we wanted this to be somewhat, to the extent possible, evidence-based, that we expected references, we expected citations in the chapter, that this wasn't just their thoughts on something, that this was to be grounded in evidence. And so just sharing that with you. I don't know, Susan, is there anything else about the origins of the book before we talk about how it's actually being used?
I think you said it. I think that's basically it.
And it took about 2 years, I think, till we were able to, get it approved through Springer Publishing. And then, and of course, for them to approve it, they had to know, at least in general, some of the authors that we, had said yes, and then working with the authors and meeting timelines and deadlines and final copy. But yeah, it was a nice work.
We survived several meltdowns.
Yes, but it came to be, and very thankful that Phil had that idea and came to us, and we're just tickled to hear that another program is using it. We do not, in our coach training program, do not require it, but we do reference a number of chapters that are relevant to what's happening, and so many of our students buy the book to have that. So one of the ways that we're using it, and I want to acknowledge Sister Susan again, because she has these such interesting ideas. One of the things that we were concerned about, because I have other reference books, and I have a very, very good, and I'm not criticizing it in any way, another coach reference book that sits on my shelf. And I did use it for this presentation today, but for the most part, it sits on my shelf. And we said, how can we make sure that this reference book, that this text isn't just sitting on someone's shelf as another reference book that doesn't get used? How can we bring it to life? So Sister Susan had this idea with our local ICF chapter, and we worked with them about, why don't we do something that's kind of like a book club, where people would be required to read a chapter, and then we'd have a Zoom call and we'd discuss it, and we'd talk about what we got out of it and how we're using it in our coaching, and maybe do a demo or something. We just had this general idea. So we said, we picked a chapter that we thought we wanted to read as a club first, or as a chapter first. And it happened to be Intentional Change Theory with Richard Boyatzis. And then somebody had the idea, I can't remember who it was, that maybe it would be polite if we invited the author. Maybe it would be nice to tell the authors, first of all, let the authors know this is what we were doing, that their work was not sitting on somebody's shelf, that we were actually using it. And wouldn't it be nice to let them know that? And while we're letting them know that, perhaps they might want to join us. And lo and behold, Richard Boyatzis, who is quite busy and very well known in his field, said, of course. And so we started to invite all of the authors, and we've been doing this since, I think it was February, somewhere in 2019. I can't remember the number of sessions that we've done, probably about 10, something like that.
Here.
We've done 14 sessions over the past 3 years.
Wow. Thank you, Christine. So 14 chapters over the past 3 years. And I think every single one, the author has agreed to come on with us. Isn't that right?
That's
I mean,
right.
I've been to all of them. I can't think of a time that an author didn't. Yes. So it's been really wonderful. We oftentimes will interview the author about, why they even agreed to do the chapter, what they were hoping would happen with the information. Oftentimes asking them, what are the really salient points? What do you hope that we as coaching practitioners really take away from this, how we can incorporate it into our coaching? So it's been lovely to have the authors join us as we explore these chapters. And I just there's a number of people on the call from the chapter. I don't want to be the only one talking about, what's been your experience with that? What's been the benefit of having that program?
Janice, I can respond if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So I just want to remind everybody that was on Richard Boyatzis's call. He came with a glass of wine, if you remember. He was very relaxed and ready for a conversation. But I think that for me, what is most, what I appreciate most is it's really putting the information into real life. Like we talk about how can we use this in our everyday coaching? What's the most important thing? It's really like taking those words off the page and with the help of the author, really bringing it to life and understanding it better.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah.
And I would also say that for me, it was just the exposure to all these different fields of coaching that I would not necessarily have, access to or know about, and different theories. And there's, for those who haven't read the book, there's a chapter on executive, there's a chapter on health and wellness, there's a chapter on internal parts. So it's just bringing it all together in one book is such a wonderful resource to gain that exposure to an introduction to other, branches of coaching, which are not available otherwise until you specifically go and search for those.
Yeah, thanks, Sidra.
And if I could add, it takes it from of hard concepts, which are in the book, to application, because we go into breakouts after we explore the details of the chapter with the author present. So it really is a well-rounded hour and a half, and one that really assists us in the educational process moving forward. I think I will remember the details of some of these chapters more than most books I've read.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. And bringing it back to our topic, the fact that it isn't just this author's individual thoughts, right? We ask them to do a scholarly article, scholarly chapter for us. So yes, we could take a book off the shelf, a book that somebody just wrote, and have a book club around it. But we're working with a chapter that has been researched, right? Or that there are references there that if we want to know more about, we have access to, we can go and search for that information. I think that sort of sets it apart from just a book club I don't want to say just self-help book, but you know what I mean, a vetted book.
And I think the authors are often very generous and offer extra materials or kind of invite, if somebody really wants to research more deeply in an area they're interested in, that you have more or less permission to contact them personally.
Yeah.
I'm in several book clubs now, and I am just so excited. You can't see it, but I'm excited because I never thought to invite even though I've gone to one, and we had one of the authors that came, but I never thought in my own personal book club to invite one of the authors. So this is very exciting news. So thank you for putting that in the ear. Yes. And I said writing, I sent an email, a chat, and I said, what surprised you in your writing? But I meant editing. When you were editing the book, you and Susan and the other person, what was surprising about it? What surprised you when you were going through the editing part of it?
I'm going to turn that over to Susan. What surprised you?
Well, it's easy to think of them as like, oh, they've gotten, they have a big reputation, and then you get their writing and it's no better than your own. And so that's just kind of a surprising. Or one chapter that I edited, I did a lot of editing on it because it was so poorly done. But so they're just, they're just people like us, but it's easy to have idealized them and find out they're just people like us. And so that was a little surprising.
One of the things that was maybe surprising for me is, we're unknowns, right? And we reached out to people that were big in the field who agreed to do this, with us. It's not like I have some big reputation that somebody said, well, yes, of course, I'll write a chapter for Janice. I think that was a little surprising that people were so willing to contribute and put the time in to do a scholarly piece. I don't know if that's surprising as much as it was just an honor. Yeah. So Carrie, I'm paying attention to the time here. How about how you all are using it?
Yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you for the labor of love that both you and Susan and Phil put into this. I think it's serving the coaching profession. And so I want to say thank you. And I reached out to you. You didn't know me. And I'm like, hey, come talk to us. We're using it in a very similar way than one of the previous speakers question that was raised. And that is, we want this information to be accessible. And I can't ask my students and learners to read 15 textbooks. And so to be able to just take morsels of well-researched material in one volume is really helpful. And there's a framework there. So our students are reading chapters that apply to their practice and apply to their learning. And some of it's self-directed and some of it's assigned. But we want to be in the conversation. Coaching is a very abundant mindset. This conversation we have connects directly to the coaching mindset, which is we're constantly in our own professional growth and development. But we're accessible. We need to be accessible to our clients and each other. And so I want to thank you, Janice, and Susan, and everybody else who participated in this lovely conversation. I appreciate just the thoughts that were raised and just the sharing of wisdom. I know we're at the top of the hour, and so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and release you all. And I appreciate, everything everybody had to say.
Thank you, Carrie. It's been an honor.